All right, thanks to everybody for joining us this week. This week we're going to be talking about the hate that goes behind LifeWise Academy. We're going to kind of get into, the hateful beliefs that they hold, what they're teaching the kids, and the discrimination that they're facing. We're going to show that at every level, hopefully, because it's not just the kids; they're doing it to each other, to the schools. So we're just going to touch on all that a little bit.
All right, so to start off, I know this seems like a large undertaking, but we're going to quickly go over a short history of sort of evangelical power in America. So we're going to begin with the foundations. These were built not on inclusion or freedom, but on exclusion, moral control, and violence. So just remember that. In the 1740s and 50s, during what's known as the First Great Awakening, evangelical Protestant revivalism swept across the colonies. So these are emotional conversion focused movements, and they emphasize personal salvation and biblical truth. What they did was set the stage for moralizing crusades, where anyone who dissented from the dominant Christian narrative, which at this time would have been, again, evangelicals of different denominations, Protestant evangelicals of different denominations. So anyone who dissented from that dominant Christian narrative was labeled as a threat or an enemy of God. By the 1800s, that same religious fervor was being used to justify slavery. So Southern evangelicals are preaching that slavery was not only acceptable, but ordained by scripture. And this turned white supremacy into a spiritual mandate. Black resistance wasn't just punished, it was framed as a rebellion against divine order. So please understand how they're framing this is so much more, so much bigger to these people of deep faith than just slavery. It is, again, they're seeing it as a divine mandate. So churches were deeply complicit in reinforcing slavery as a moral and natural institution. So again, we're going to go between 1830s and 70s, a lot of evangelical hostility, particularly towards Catholics and Mormons, because they're sort of new on the scene at this time. Protestant leaders and mobs led riots. They burned churches. They pushed back and they attacked against religious minorities. And this era saw like a ton of violence. This is when there's a movie or a show that came out recently that was talking about sort of Mormon times and in this era. And this is exactly what we were talking about. Forgive me, I can't remember the name of the show right now, but I watched it and it was very interesting. Um, so these aren't just moments in the past. They form the ideological foundation for what we will still see today. The use of religion as a tool to exclude, dominate, and suppress. As we move into the early 20th century, we see evangelicalism respond to modern times with intense cultural backlash and the rise of religious fundamentalism. This is their response to these minority religions coming on the scene, to the pluralism of the country. It is, they really start to ramp up their response at this point. The 1920s, you have the Scopes trial, sometimes known as the Monkey Scopes trial, and it's putting science and religion head to head in a courtroom. It's really about evangelicals fighting to ban evolution from being taught. And this launches the fundamentalist movement. So the movement wasn't just about education, it was about resisting secularism, modern science, and pluralism. All of those things, they were like, absolutely not. And it framed all of those things as a threat to Christian authority. By the 1930s and 40s, we see a rise in Christian nationalism, which of course we are all familiar with now. We are seeing a rise again. But back then, evangelicals began to fuse faith with patriotism, right? Arguing that, America being the best was ordained by God. That's where this time frame, that's where that sort of came. The push to add under God comes at this time. You see Eisenhower signing that into law. Um, and then let's see, forgive me, there's a lot of information here, you guys. um, you have the Johnson Amendment passed in 1954, and that's trying to restrict churches from overtly political activity, which we are again seeing a rise in today. But many white evangelicals at the time sort of ignored it and resisted it, especially when it came to opposing desegregation or defending segregationist institutions. Again, so in the 1960s, the evangelical leaders are citing biblical order to justify segregation, claiming that integration was not in line with God's will. 1970s is when you see the Christian right born, Jerry Falwell, focus on the family. They start attacking feminism, abortion rights, LGBTQ plus people, and their equality. And these movements wrapped political control in religious language. They are mobilizing under the banners of family values and traditional morality. That is when we're seeing this. The 1970s is when that really comes onto the stage. So, what started as a cultural resistance in the early 20th century quickly grew into a highly organized, potent political force, a voting bloc, one that is still shaping our laws and education today. Give me just a moment here, guys. Okay. Okay, so in the 1980s, evangelical Christians fully entered the political arena. Not just as a religious group again, but this is when they're really becoming a voting bloc and organizing themselves. The Jerry Falwell and the moral majority that we just talked about are almost single-handedly responsible for helping aid to get Reagan elected. And the religious right has found their champion in him. He embraces their language and their priorities. During the AIDS crisis, evangelical leaders used tragedy to promote moral panic, framing LGBTQ plus people as sinful and deserving of the suffering that they were getting. At the same time, these evangelicals are pushing campaigns for the first time, not for the first time, but really strongly for book banning, anti-sex education, and they're aiming to control the cultural narratives in our public schools. By the 1990s, the movement became even more aggressive. That's sort of my childhood. I don't know what you guys, what generation you are, but elder millennial, I remember the 90s and them being very much like youth group was being pushed and what would Jesus do bracelets and that sort of thing. Policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell and the Defense of Marriage Acts were passed with the explicit support of the evangelical activists, of course. And really what that did was enshrine discrimination against the gay community and the queer community into federal law. So we move into the 2000s. The post 9/11 climate gave the evangelicals a new target, Muslims. The war on terror became a vehicle for Islamophobia. You guys all remember that. You couldn't have brown skin and get on a plane without suffering the effects of that for a long time, maybe even still in some areas. They framed Muslims as these huge threats to Christian America. And this period also saw a renewed tack on public education. So they're again pushing to replace evolution with creationism and intelligent design in our school curricula. So across these 3 decades, the evangelical movement has expanded its reach and entrenched its political power. It's broadened its list of networking and allies, and they have really grown at this point. As we enter the 2010s and move into the present, we see evangelical movements in the US shift from cultural defense to full-scale political radicalization, intensifying efforts to reshape our laws, education, and civil society in their own image. In the 2010s, we saw the emergence of Project Blitz, which was a coordinated legal and legislative strategy backed by evangelical groups. They're pushing Christian national policies into state houses. So these sort of things would have included Bible and school mandates, 10 Commandments, monuments, and discriminatory religious freedom laws, which were, of course, aimed at LGBTQ plus people, women, and faith minorities. So then we get to the 2016 election of Donald Trump, and 80% of white evangelicals voted for him. Many of their evangelical leaders framed Trump as a chosen vessel. Not despite his behavior, but because they saw him as a blunt instrument to enforce their agenda, right? Like that is the understanding that we must have is by this point, it is not about him being a Christian person, but him being a tool for their agenda. So this is marking an open resurgence of white Christian nationalism at this point, which we have all lived through and we all understand more than we wish. With political theology overtaking traditional religious doctrine. That's what we're looking at right now. We move into the 2020s. Obviously, focus intensifies on schools, trans youth, and church-state separation. Evangelicals began pushing policies under the banners of parental rights. Where have we heard that before? It is LifeWise Academy's go-to, right? Is that these are the parents' rights. But what about the rest of us parents? What about the children's rights? What about the rights to the separation of church and state? And so this is not about protecting children. It's about controlling what children are taught and who gets to exist safely in schools. Meanwhile, released religious time instruction programs like LifeWise are exploding. These programs siphon kids out of public schools during the school day. We know what they do, and they are using a loophole in state law to obliterate the line between separation of church and state. We're seeing an increase in hostile rhetoric and campaigns against trans youth, drag for performers, any kind of inclusivity, any kind of wokeism. So this just isn't about politics anymore. It's about a movement determined to use faith as a weapon of control. In 2022, a Pew Research poll reported that 45% of Americans believe the country should be a Christian nation. More than half of those people said the Bible should influence US laws. So what we are left with after all of this is a legacy of hate in holy wrapping. Evangelical Protestantism in America has repeatedly been used not only as a spiritual framework, but as a political weapon, as we've seen, one that often targets the vulnerable, justifies inequality, and undermines our democracy. So we see it now from slavery to school boards. The rhetoric of faith has been masked in campaigns of hate.
Yeah, and it's very much a trend throughout history, and it builds this us versus them idealism, right? All of these things are very much based, and if you're not with us, you're against us, right? And kind of the three main transitions, or the three main lines that we see throughout the history have been race, the LGBTQ community, and other minority religions or people of no religions at all, right? So these three groups specifically have been, discriminated against because of these beliefs and this agenda for all time, right? And
Yeah.
it continues to
Since
this day.
recorded history, right? Since we've known of, yeah.
And like Molly said, in my lifetime, it has been the LGBTQ plus community. Like that is what has been in the headlines my entire lifetime, right? They blamed Hurricane Katrina on it. They blamed coronavirus on it. So, this article goes on to talk about different evangelicals who have blamed that community on all sorts of different things. Abortion as well. It's not just that community. They're blaming terrorist attacks and Hurricane Katrina on abortion as well. So these type of ideals are also being spewed with the hate just hand in hand, right? The Southern Baptist Convention, we're going to get into them specifically a little bit because, as hopefully some of you know, this is where LifeWise gets their curriculum from directly. This is the Southern Baptist Convention's material that LifeWise is using. So they have a long history too, right? It goes all the way back to supporting slavery. Like that is how they broke from the larger Baptist coalition, is because they were supporting of slavery. As you can see, NPR saying they have a deep history of racism. Um, there's, the LGBTQ community, of course, even Catholics, like we said, minority religions, other faiths, they're also, the target. And then there's the misogyny too. Like Molly can
Yeah,
talk more about that.
I was gonna say, we know from slaveholding to now they're covering up sexual abuse. So they're not just struggling with their past, but they are actively dealing with scandal and upheaval and awfulness within their ranks even today. I think it was it was 2022, I believe. I'm not sure what year it was, but there was like 700 women and instances of abuse that came forward, and they covered them entirely up. Um, that is a really I can't explain how awful that is, because not only are you not giving those current victims justice, not only are you not punishing the people who abuse them and the predators who are out there now, but you're also setting a precedence for anyone else who may be looking to abuse, that that's something that you are going to tolerate in your church and in your ranks. And that is so outrageously dangerous when you look at the numbers of people that are involved in these specific denominations of churches in our country. I mean, I think what also it really comes down to is, despite all their public claims of goodwill, their actions say otherwise when it comes to the Southern Baptist Convention, right, Zach? Like, we can't take their word at face value. We have to look at the actions and the harm that they cause. And they're doing the same thing that we see over and over again. They're cloaking hate and religious language. And that makes it especially dangerous, right? Because it is moralizing that exclusion and that justifying oppression, and it silences everyone in the name of God. That's a really hard thing to come up against.
They
Um,
don't always cloak it, as you can
oh,
see. Sometimes they're very open about it, and this is what the extreme version of this looks like, right?
yeah,
This is what that mindset and this indoctrination looks like on the extreme end of the scale, unfortunately.
this is the kind of hate that grows when religious extremism goes unchecked. Like, this is where it ends up. So in 2024, he openly called for the execution of gay preachers, saying they deserved a bullet in the brain. That's what this particular headline is about. So, this is not just rhetoric, it's a call to violence, and it's delivered from a pulpit. So what that does is it wraps it in religious justification. And this is not the first time this particular gentleman has called for violence against the LGBTQ community, using the same platform. And, in his church, he delivered a sermon in 2022, where he used the phrase that queer people should be lined up against the wall and shot in the back of the head.
And he's certainly not the only one, in reference to that Dame article that I pulled up earlier that just had a whole list. And that was a small portion of the list that reporter had been keeping.
Yeah. This is the extreme end of the spectrum of hate, but it begins with those dehumanizing laws and the discriminatory theology and the moral panic. It begins there and it ends in bullets in the head. This is LifeWise Academy's official worldview statement. It's available online. You can go and look at it, and it makes their agenda crystal clear. They explicitly define sexuality as something that only belongs in a marriage between one man and one woman. They reject gender diversity and assert that a person's sex is fixed by God and should never be altered. This is not neutral, and it's rigid, it's exclusionary. Um, they're pushing their belief system onto the children. The sanctity of life language. It's so coded. It's the cornerstone of anti-abortion ideology, right? If anyone's ever been involved in sort of that area, you would know that. You would recognize that code immediately. And we know that's used to oppose all sorts of things: reproductive rights, end of life care, bodily autonomy, you name it. So, you know bringing this into the public schools, it's inappropriate. It just is, because not everyone aligns with this worldview, obviously.
Yeah, this worldview is at the foundation of what we're talking about here, right? This is where the hate comes from, is this belief, this divine belief. So this particular worldview statement is something that every employee and volunteer has to sign and agree to, much like the statement of faith. And there's, a few other documents, but anybody who works for LifeWise has to agree to that statement there and, sign it. And that's brought problems. A friend of mine actually used to volunteer in the Paulding chapter, and it had issues because he wasn't willing to sign it, and he also got some shit from his director because he was in a relationship with another man, right? Uh, so this is internally how they deal with it, right? They will fire you if you come out of the closet or if you have a relationship, anything like that. And, my buddy didn't want to sign it to begin with because he didn't want to assign something that he didn't agree with. But even that wasn't the end of it. He still ended up getting pushed out by the director as well because the current choice doesn't align with the stance, right? They wanted him to not volunteer at the time. So, this is just how they look, just treating each other this way. They also teach it to the kids, though. Like, it's not just about how they treat each other that way.
And we teach, this is the big hang up nowadays. God created man and woman. He didn't make mistakes. And marriage is one man and one woman.
So yeah, that's their regional representative, Buddy Workman, just saying this is what we teach, right? Because they don't believe it's hateful, they just believe it is true and fact.
But what do you tell to the second grader who's got two moms at home? What is the kid that's going to LifeWise saying to that kid when they get back to class? That is what it comes down to, right? Is that they are asking these children, it was all designed for these children to go back and to proselytize to their peers and to spread these messages. And that is the sort of message that is being spread.
And I'm sure some of you might be familiar with this. This is the difficult questions from students documents. This is part of LifeWise's guidance that they give to teachers when students come up and ask these questions about these types of things, right? This is how they want teachers to respond to the children when they come up and ask. So we highlighted some of them here. Family questions, how can I honor my parents? And the answer is, when faced with a choice to obey God or our parents, we should always obey God first. That's the root of that, is the authoritarian in it, right? Or the authority in it. Like, God's word comes before everything else. This justifies every action past that. That's what you need to understand with this. When you have this much devotion, any action is justified when it's in the name of God, right?
Yeah, I think this this document is really supposed to appear, it's intended to appear transparent, right? That is what his intentions are. It's not given to the public. This would be given to teachers and to volunteers. But when you look at it closer, what it really reveals is that they just time after time after time dodge accountability and affirm exclusionary beliefs.
And again, they're exclusionary of all types. It's if you have no faith, if you have a different faith, because you won't see your family again if they don't follow Jesus, right? So this is where the proselytization starts coming in, and the discrimination against minority faiths. Why are you putting that on a second grader? Why are you telling a second grader that, because your grandparents are Jewish, you're not going to see them in heaven? Because your dad's an atheist, he's not going to go to heaven. That's not something these children should be having to deal with.
No. Things like purity culture, and uh the marriage construct, the heteronormative marriage construct, that sort of thing. My mom's boyfriend lives with us. Is that a sin? My parents are divorced. Did they break God's rules? There's another question about being gay, being in a same-sex relationship. Are these things sins? And the answers all boil down to yes. Yes, they are sins. And what does sin get you? A ticket to hell. So really, they're using a lot of words to say not very much, and a very narrow and hateful view of the world and of people. You
And
see
of
here,
course, the gender identity and sex questions is the longest section, right?
right? Exactly. So there's no effort to create a safe or affirming space or environment for queer students at all. There's only theological justification for exclusion, and continually, when asked about these things, they just deflect. That's what these answers are, really, is just deflection. They frame their teachings as biblical truth, while quietly enforcing anti-LGBTQ plus ideology, that's really excluding and harmful for queer youth and their families.
And you can see this, and we're not just showing you the documents and what they're teaching. We have seen this time and time again in testimonies and examples of children going through this type of discrimination. This particular one here came to us from a teacher who had a student come back from LifeWise last year and tell a girl that she was a lesbian and they couldn't be friends because she didn't want to go to hell, right? This particular parent also, or this particular student also had their feet washed, which I just think is a fun little bonus thing here that I like to point out. It's gross, it's weird, these people are washing the feet of children, but that's not hateful, so we're not gonna get into that. The other thing was here, I'll go back real quick. The other thing is that the teacher isn't allowed to teach anything new. So we're going to get into that in just a minute as well. It's not just the students that are discriminating against each other. The schools discriminate against these kids that aren't going as well. And this is what we're worried about. This came out of a middle school. This was posted on a locker in a middle school in Ohio. This is the type of teaching leads to this type of stuff, right?
See at the bottom where it says come back to God. This is an imagery that just is organically, that children organically come up with.
No, this comes from being taught hate. in the name of God. I mean, that's what it is. It is hate in the name of God. So this is LifeWise's statement of faith. We won't get into this. I know we've touched on it before, but the main thing that I want to pull out here is number 14 and 15. The Christian immediately enters into eternal consciousness to everlasting glory and blessing, whereas the unbeliever enters immediately into hell, right? Everlasting judgment and condemnation. So again, this is the us versus them mentality at its base level, right? If you are not with us, you are going to hell, you are going to burn, right? So this is going to fall into discrimination against every other faith, every other, minority faith, non-faith, secularism. This is where that starts to come in. And again, we see signs of this in the classroom, in the children.
Yeah. So, this is what happens when religious indoctrination is given space inside our public schools. A 9-year-old child came home from school deeply upset. This is what this was about. He was being told that he was going to hell for not believing in Jesus. And he asked his mom, I thought all religions were good. Why would I go to hell? And again, this didn't just happen once, it happened a second time. It's the same friend. This is the harm of embedding one's religious worldview, which LifeWise is evangelical Christianity, into the public school day. So it's creating fear, confusion, and division among young kids. And these kids are young enough that they're just beginning to explore the world around them and what it means for all of these complex, nuanced ideals, right? Religion included. As this parent put it so clearly, this is not a Christian nation. It's a nation where you can be free to be a Christian or Hindu or any type of religion or no religion at all. So programs like LifeWise don't just cross the line. They teach children to carry that line into their friendships. That's not religious freedom, that's religious bullying.
LifeWise likes to say that they don't teach this to the kids. They don't try to teach them this us and them, and they don't teach them to bully them. But here's a perfect example of them literally promoting it, right? This is LifeWise Academy and Continental posting this picture that the students drew about what they learned the year before. And if you look at the drawing real close, it is God fake child that says ooh with no muscles, and it's incorrect, versus the God real guy with real big muscles that says it's correct, right? So this is really meme culture, if you're familiar with that. This is a child's attempt to remake a Chad meme. But it is this bullying and this discrimination, especially at that level and that age, right? You're saying the non-believer is gross and weak, right? I don't know how much more a child that age could draw it out,
It's literally in black and white.
Yeah. And again, the fact that LifeWise is promoting it as something, look what we're teaching them, right? And then they'll go back and say, well, we're not actually teaching this type of division or this type of hate. That's not what our lessons are about. Well, it's hard to believe that when we see this.
This is a real email, testimony from a Jewish parent in Liberty Benton, Ohio. Their 3rd grade son is one of just a few kids that don't attend, that they opted out of LifeWise Academy. So he spends Thursdays in a no new instruction study hall while the rest of his classmates are bussed away for what he sees as a fun field trip, candies, cookies, games, and whatever messages that he's being left out of. And you see, he and I now fight at home every other month or so because, in his perception, I've blocked him from going. And why can't I just believe in Jesus like the others for candy and cookies? This is really illustrates the division that it causes, right? The othering, bringing the conflict into the family unit from home after it's been, this isn't something that would normally happen with with the 3rd graders, right? But because LifeWise is in there, because they're embedding their ideology into the public school day, this is the result. This is what religious othering looks like in real time. So this is a Jewish child feeling isolated, a parent that's torn between their faith and their child's social survival, which is hard. If you're a parent, you know all about that. And a family who intentionally avoided private Christian schools, only to have public school become religious by another name. So this family moved to this district and they made specific decisions about their life and their family and their home and their finances, for inclusion and academic strength. And what they found instead was pressure, exclusion, and indoctrination sponsored by their public school. via LifeWise. And this parent's final line says it all. RTRI in our public school will continue to identify our kid as an outsider. This is not a choice. No matter what they say to you, this is not a choice. This is coercion.
And let's just play devil's advocate and say that this parent did just say, okay, go ahead and go, just for the candy and the games and the fun. Again, because they're being taught, well, if your family doesn't believe as well, they're going to hell and you're not going to see them in the afterlife. This still doesn't stop at the door. This still comes back home for these parents to deal with.
This is a case out of Fredericktown, Ohio, where a LifeWise representative crossed a really serious line. So there's a tutor named Dimri Alonso, tutor of English as a second language, and she actually witnessed a LifeWise representative tell one of her third grade students, that third grade student just happened to be a Hindu, or happened to be Hindu, that they could teach her about Jesus. So so this didn't happen during a church service or at a community event. This happened during that child's school day, their public school day. That
And
is
not from a peer, from somebody in an authoritative position, right? Because when
exactly.
they're walking in there and taking kids out of the other classrooms, to a child in third grade, that certainly looks like a part of the school staff.
And I mean, the seriousness, I don't know if it comes through correctly. But what this is it's unsolicited proselytizing, targeting a religious minority child in a government funded institution. That's what this is. It is so illegal and inappropriate and awful that I just don't even have words for it. They did an investigation, and I guess really it was like a slap on the wrist, and the superintendent reminding them to refrain from soliciting student participation during school hours. You know, so that was the result of such an infraction, which I think is ridiculous, but it's just my opinion.
And again, this is the LifeWise representative. We've seen the kids putting pressure on each other. We're seeing the LifeWise representatives put pressure on the kids. But like we mentioned earlier, the school can be just as, involved as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is a firsthand account from a parent in Van Wert, Ohio. This is the same town where LifeWise was founded, actually. So just know that it runs deep and it is pervasive there. Their son was one of the only two students in his class who didn't attend. The school heavily pushed the program, even saying it was highly suggested to the parent at a back to school night. But once LifeWise began, the two non-participating kids were made to sit in a classroom and do math problems while their peers were off-site having fun at LifeWise. Um, when the rest of the class returned, they would have snacks and treats, and they were able to eat them at that point. And the other kids just didn't have them, like just didn't have the same treat or food or whatever. So it's not just poor planning. It feels like punishment for not conforming, right? That is what it feels like to the child, and I'm sure what it feels like to the parents as well. So when a parent raised the concerns, the school was very dismissive, and they were like, just sign the child up then. Like if it's a problem, then just sign them up then. And when they refused, they were threatened with attendance penalties. The parents were threatened with attendance penalties. Luckily this parent was, had the ability to do some pushback, and the ability to sort of say like, well, I'm going to come and take my kid out and for this amount of time and bring him back, and he can have whatever treats and stuff that I bring back. And it was at that point that the school backed down finally and agreed to let the kids pick what they wanted to do during that free time, rather than have it be like this math problem punishment ordeal. But this is what LifeWise looks like in practice, right? It's social pressure, institutional bias, and exclusion designed as values education. So parents and families who opt out are often left to fight just to ensure that their children are treated fairly. Not better than, but just fairly and equally as the ones that are going to LifeWise.
Yep. And this account mirrors what happened to me and my daughter, when she was in second and third grade. These emails are actually from her school. Thankfully, the school never told me to just sign her up because I had to flip my lid. But internally, they were saying that to each other. You can see down here in this bottom email, this is the principal of that school that my daughter went to, talking about another student, saying he definitely needs some Jesus in his life. And then we have another teacher up here calling kids LifeWise leftovers. That was specifically in reference to the group that my daughter was in. Um, so you can just see that this happens really from every level. That's what we're trying to demonstrate here. They're getting the pressure and the bullying, not only from their peers, from the LifeWise representatives when they're coming into the buildings to pick these kids up, but also from the teachers and the school and the principal themselves in a lot of cases,
In a
unfortunately.
lot of cases.
Yeah, we're only showing you a few examples of the things we have. Like there are so many instances of bullying.
Things like
There's so many
this.
testimonies. There are so many violations of schools crossing the line, putting the pressure on these kids and just embedding this program into their school. Again, this is from my daughter's school where they're just listing LifeWise. This is the type of discrimination because it's automatically making it a problem when your friends go, well, why aren't you coming to LifeWise with us? Right? When it's put up here like this as part of your school day, you are othered when you're not going for whatever reason that is.
Just inherently othered because you're not following the schedule that's for everyone.
It's ironic that these schools will help and push LifeWise because the hate from LifeWise also goes into the schools as well. They are not fans of the public education. They are so ingrained and their entire business model thrives on public education, but they are part of this larger agenda that wants to dismantle it as well. We feel like that, that is part of the hate. They want to pull our systems down. So we're going to play this clip here real quick.
Okay, the gospel is not present in schools. There's another agenda being pushed on kids, another religious agenda in some people's eyes. At the end of the day, there's a debate. And some people say, get your kids out of public school. They shouldn't be there. No kid should be in public school. What do you say? You're in a unique position because you're serving kids in public schools and families. What do you say to those who say no kid should be in public schools?
Well, I don't know if if they want to say that, they can say that. And I'm not necessarily interested in having that debate. I mean, I went to public school. My wife went to private school when she was a kid. We homeschool our kids, and yet we also send our kids, and they participate in public school activities like sports and other things. And so we have the full mix. What I would say to somebody who might say, I don't know if they'd say public school should be abolished or something, I would say, maybe, but right now public schools exist and there's kids there and they're not all going to leave today. And we need to get to those kids and we need to get to those families.
So again, this is real clearly showing you what the agenda is. It is using these schools that they don't believe should exist as a tool to reach children and families.
Yeah, and in the meantime, it can be a money-making grift of epic proportions. Why not? That's two birds with one stone.
This is just another example of how, they do not support the public schools. This comes from LifeWise Eaton. This post has since been pulled down, but we screenshotted it when it was up. And, it's this campaign to not pass the school levy because they believe, they're part of the agenda and stomping on their religious rights, right? So this is at the top level and it's at the bottom level locally here.
And if you've ever, go ahead, sorry, Zach.
I was just going to say, we showed in one of our previous videos the kind of people that are behind this at the, local levels, right? They're not supportive of the schools. They are bullies. They are hateful.
Absolutely.
What were you going to say, Molly?
Just that, this is really indicative of an argument that really ends up coming up time and time again. If you've ever seen a comment section about LifeWise or been in one or had a debate with someone about LifeWise, eventually what it comes down to, I don't know, 85% of the time is, well, our public schools are failing us anyway. We need to get rid of them. Well, our public schools are a joke anyway. And we know that. We've all seen that with our own eyes. That's where that ends up. And that is the belief of this organization and their audience. And really LifeWise is existing in a meantime capacity, right? To suck the money out of them, convert as many kids as they possibly can, suck the money out of these tiny communities. And then when the public schools are destroyed, hey, maybe the LifeWise schools will take over, right? All these buildings that LifeWise has built right next to the schools, maybe those can go ahead and take over and be a source of public education for those towns. I mean, that is what they would love to see.
Right. And the explicit lack of fighting against that when Joel got asked that question in the clip really shows like the proof is in the pudding there, right? He couldn't just fight against that because he knows that is what the target audience believes for his organization.
Right. He couldn't say, absolutely not. These public school kids,
Need
they
our
just
support
hear the
and need our help.
gospel. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. He didn't say, no, that's our prime audience. And that's, these kids deserve to hear the gospel just as much as anyone else. No, he didn't say that.
Again, they're bullying at the school more, even at the board member level. If they're pressuring the kids, they're certainly pressuring other adults who are involved in getting this decision passed. And this is something we've seen time and time again and have multiple examples of. This one happened to be in the paper. Um, but yeah, it's just about a board member who really got bullied and pressured and threatened not to, pass the levies and to bring his whole congregation to the school board meetings to make a scene because the school board member didn't want to go along with adopting an RTRI policy to accommodate LifeWise when LifeWise came and asked. Again, this wasn't a parent coming to ask. This was a LifeWise, employee or a pastor working for them. Like, it wasn't a parent coming. They always say this is parent driven. It's simply not the case.
If they get their claws into a parent in the district, yeah, absolutely. It's parent driven because they can put it all on that one parent. But otherwise, no, this is a corporate entity coming into your district, wanting to skim money off of it. Really, truly is what it comes down to. And, to inject their Christian evangelical ideology into the future of your school, the future of your area, the children. This is an internal email, or not an internal email, but this is an email from a former LifeWise volunteer, someone who was deeply committed to bringing LifeWise into public school, as you can tell. They are upset because they are saying that LifeWise pushed a woman out of her role as director, despite her being fully dedicated to making it happen. And what this is it's a rare glimpse into the frustration and dysfunction behind the scenes, right? She's accusing LifeWise of pushing out a dedicated program director, simply because the surrounding community was struggling financially. In her words, it disgusts me that we want to bring Jesus into the public schools, and yet we can't do that because of the price of materials you are charging. She calls the organization's obsession with money something you should all be ashamed of. Despite her loyalty, she resigns from the program and makes it clear, I want nothing further to do with LifeWise, and I will not have good things to say about the program if asked. So this is not an outsider critique. This is someone who was a devoted insider walking away in protest, disillusioned by the program that claims to be about faith and gospel and spreading it, but is run like a business and driven by control. So when the faithful start stepping away, it tells me everything I need to know. So, if you don't have an issue with them ideologically, religiously, or whatever, like a lot of us do, then please know that even people who are faithful, truly dedicated, faithful employees are also seeing the grift that LifeWise is. Because, I mean, they made $32 million?
Yep.
And they're
And it's
talking
not
about,
it's not just the grift, it's not just the grift they're seeing, it's also the bullying, right? This is how they're treating each other internally. And
yeah, these are adults bullying each other.
yeah. And we've got another example of that that's in the news right now.
Yeah, this is Rachel Snell. She is a former teacher and volunteer for LifeWise. And she alleges that LifeWise coerced her to falsify her timesheets. And when she refused, she was accused of making unholy social media posts and of misrepresenting the organization politically. So you know, she's fighting them, saying that they are so dishonest, so money hungry, that they would ask someone to lie and to be dishonest on, like, a federal document on a timesheet, which this person was not going to do. And then when she would not comply and she started to push back, they really ramped up the bullying and the name calling and stuff. And because she filed a discrimination claim with the OCRC, that is the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, LifeWise is actually going in and trying to change trying to change the law and make it so that they can have, like, that the ministerial exception, that the OCRC doesn't have, like, oversight into employee issues, okay, because of that. So why it matters: if the court sides with LifeWise, it could set a dangerous precedent. Religious franchises operating in public schools could avoid accountability for labor or discrimination claims simply by claiming ministerial status. And that's not religious franchises operating in public schools. That's any kind of religious business or organization or otherwise. Parachurch, anything you want to, anything that is religiously, involved at all or about religion, is they could claim this in order to avoid accountability for labor and discrimination claims. So
Discrimination claims is huge there. Like this particular thing is as much about labor discrimination, but this is discrimination as a whole that we're talking about, which should already be something that we're, considering, because if you don't sign that worldview statement, you're not allowed to work for them, as we showed earlier, right? So they already have this level of discrimination in there, but now they want to get it backed up by the court that they're allowed to do it, right? That's really what this is coming down to.
right, and they just want to put blinders on and make it so that this is never an issue for them again.
Yep.
Having a former employee file a claim against them and want an investigation to be had.
So hopefully we've kind of shown you how this discrimination and this bullying has always historically been there, who it's specifically been targeting. Like we said, it really has kind of always come down to race and the LGBTQ plus community and, minority faiths. There's women in there too. They discriminate against them, but it's just anybody who isn't them. It's this us and them vibe that they are, teaching. So
Yeah, absolutely. And this is happening, during the public school day in an institution that we have spent so many years and so much money and time and education and knowledge, making it to be a place of inclusivity and a place of acceptance and safety for all kids, right? Whether you're poor or rich, or you have two moms at home, or you have one mom at home who lives with her boyfriend, or you're Jewish, whatever it is, right? This is what public school is supposed to be, is a place for everyone. And they are taking children out in the middle of the day and telling them the exact opposite, and then sending them back into our institution and spreading that disgusting message. So yeah, thanks for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time. If you have any questions, maybe we can address Evelyn's in just a second here, but if you have any other questions and that you think of at a later time, you can always contact us. It's contact@seculareducationassociation.org. You can join our email list. We do a great newsletter only once a month that sort of gives you the updates on what's been happening in our fight. And then of course, for this presentation, the other scan QR code there is for our citations and source materials.
yep. We got one more next week, and it'll be our last one. What do we get into next week? The danger. Yeah, that's right.
So
Next
this
week
is
we're
sort
going to
of,
be talking about all the security concerns.
yeah, sort of what is bound to happen, right? Things have already happened, and we're going to show those things, and then we're going to talk about all of the holes and risks that are coming into play when it comes to this operation, and exactly how that probably will play out. Unfortunately, we don't believe it's going to become an issue like it is until a child is hurt. So next week we'll be talking about some ways in which that might happen, unfortunately, but maybe that will help people sort of get more fire lit under them to become more active and get involved in their community.
Evelyn's question there, the state mandates how many instructional hours each week students must have per year. And that's kind of the whole trick here with this release time religious instruction, is that when those kids are being pulled out for this class, they're still being marked in attendance. They're not taking away from those instructional hours. They're not taking away from attendance at all. They are bookkeeping it as they are in the school getting instruction from the school still, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. And that brings up, I think, another issue. Well, there's always another issue that gets brought up, right? But please remember that a lot of parents struggle with laws around instructional hours and mandated attendance and things like that. Because, for example, let's say that your child needs some sort of really intense speech therapy that's being done through a hospital, okay? They will not mark your child as an attendance for you to pull that child out during school hours to get that speech therapy. So like that parent is going to have to fight to get this thing that their child very much needs to function in society and in school and to learn, whether it's reading therapy or speech therapy or whatever it is, but those kids are counted as absent. So that's kind of where the special being treated specially if you're a religious person and then not kind of comes into play. And also because, I just as, I can't go in and pull out my kid and 3 other kids and say we're going to have like, I don't know, space camp and say it's for religious reasons. So there's just a lot of things that come into play with the laws and the attendance hours that are also, a huge scam and a huge suck on public education and our resources and our time.
And it's important to remember this precedent was set in 1952 by the Supreme Court. We weren't talking about the computerization and the counting of the hours like we do today, right? It was a whole different thing back then than what it is today. You can even get into the funding of that. It was one thing when we're talking about a few kids of minority faith doing this once a month for a holiday. Now we're talking about 80-90% of the school. That's a lot of money that the school is getting funding for when they're not doing any school stuff, right? So yeah, that's a deep rabbit hole when you start going into the attendance and the laws. So
Yeah, we actually are going to post or have already posted. Are the videos on the YouTube, Zach, or they will be?
not last week's yet. That one needs edited a bit still, but I'm gonna get it up after I'm done editing last week's. Yes.
So they will be up as soon as we can.
Yeah. And what else can you do in Indiana? I think it's important to know that Indiana, the schools have to adopt a policy. They need to know that they can put options in their policy. They can put restrictions and kind of address these things that we're seeing ahead of time. They can be proactive about it if they just adopt a smart policy and address the issues that we're seeing. So that's really what I think needs to be, spread around in Indiana, is that they do have options, because LifeWise came in, in the middle of the night and passed legislation last year in Indiana. Schools can no longer say no here. They have to adopt a policy, but they actually have more flexibility than they do in Ohio, because, they're just continuing to tighten up the laws in Ohio, even with the budget. So Indiana actually has more flexibility than Ohio does in what they can do with their school policies.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a waste of time also to talk about just general awareness, because you guys know, if you're involved in the school district at all, or you have kids or you had kids in school at one point, you sort of know how the community works, right? And word of mouth is huge. So in my town, I couldn't stop LifeWise from coming, but I laid a foundation of the narrative of the truth of what was going on, and that turned a lot of parents off. So letting people know about our organization, letting people know what you've learned from us, what denomination they truly are, what they're really teaching, that word of mouth is invaluable, because all it takes is one parent being like, you know what? My kid did say something about slaves or, adultery or something, whatever it is. And when they think it's innocent, just like singing Bible classes and coloring, maybe they'll take a second look at it. So it is always worth your time to just do that awareness campaign as well. Even if you are already mandated by laws, or laws are changing or laws are moving, people and their personal opinion and their experiences are gold. And that is what really people listen to at the end of the day, right? If you are friends with someone and they give you an example or something, they tell you something that they've learned, we feed off of that. And that is absolutely something that we should utilize as a tool, along with policy and making sure that schools are writing good policy. Yeah.
All right. So yeah, thanks everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys. We appreciate you. Have a good rest of your day.
Oh yeah, you probably don't stand much of a chance there, Mike. Unfortunately.
You know what, though? Keep trying and keep fighting. I mean, there
Yeah,
are
it's
people where
just like
you
Molly
live.
said, you can inform the other parents, they can't sustain a program if they don't have participation. So
No, and please also remember that this has been a plan behind the scenes for decades to put those Moms for Liberty type people and these sort of people into our institutions and into leadership positions in our institutions. So keep pushing back, keep fighting, keep getting those people pushed off the school board. You know, go to be on the school run for school board yourself. What we have to do is really stop allowing them to do it quietly and make sure that they know that we're watching and that we do not agree with their policies and their ideology and how they're shaping our, public life. So I don't care. I'm sort of the kind of the person that's like, I don't care how far you get, keep trying, you know, because
Yeah.
what's the ultimate, like, what is the alternative?
Exactly. We actually fought last year to stop 3 more of them to get on the school board.
Mhm.
It worked. Like none of the 3 got elected because we were loud and let parents know what exactly they're doing.
Yep. And if you bring receipts and you know what you're talking
That's
about,
exactly what we did. Yep.
exactly that. And that's what I mean. Like, if you allow them to keep doing it, I mean, what would you have ended up with? A completely stacked school board?
All
Now
7.
exactly. So now at least you've made this progress and you've made people aware and you have this momentum that you can latch onto to get the rest of them out. You know, like that is obviously the ultimate goal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Good job though doing
Yeah,
that.
that's awesome. We love to hear stuff like that. That makes
That's
my whole day.
that's literally how, we got here. We've just been yelling. So
Sometimes just at each other, but every now and again, someone hears us. So we appreciate
Thanks
you
for
guys.
everything you guys do.
yeah, of course.
All right. Yes. Submit every editor to every letter you can absolutely send. Keep sending them. Change them and send them to a different, newspaper. I think that that's one of the things that you know, we get tired and we get burnt out because we feel like we're not being heard. And I know that feeling and I know that sometimes we're not, but screaming into the void, eventually other people join you, right? And then you're not just screaming into the void anymore. Then you are screaming at each other in a productive way. So, yes, please keep doing that. Submit letters, submit your testimony. And Zach and I try to just not get overwhelmed. This is our focus on this fight, and it has a lot of different tentacles and a lot of different areas, but figure out what you're passionate about. And if it's your school board, or if it's something with your education or, policy, get involved right in that area and don't let all of this other noise overwhelm you because we need everyone in all of these sections to pay attention. Yay! That's so awesome, Evelyn. I love to hear it.
Awesome.
That's great. All
Well,
right, you guys.
we appreciate you guys coming and participating. So
Yeah.
thank you.
We'll be here next week.